The topic that has been shared with me is understanding Indian ambitions in changing domestic and regional conditions. There are various ways in which we can address this very challenging topic in the next 25 minutes. But I'll try to conceptually structure it in 4 dimensions. First, a brief but original perspective on the nature of Indian polity. Number 2, its structure and process. And number 3, how its structure and process influences the discourse, the identities, and also the policy and strategy formulation in several domains, of which I'll, for the paucity of time, restrict myself to the 4 key and most critical aspects of Indian strategic ambitions, behavior, or expression: information, diplomacy, economy, and military. So my fundamental, original argument would be that the nature of Indian polity can be best understood in the context of identity politics. There are various ways and academic lenses and theoretical paradigms available to understand, decipher, or analyze the state behavior. But perhaps, based on my modest study of the last few thousand years of South Asian history, perhaps the identity politics offers the most superior lens to help understand and explain not just the Indian politics, but also the distribution of opportunities and resources within the domestic political level, but also its expression and exercise and employment of its various elements of national power, both domestically, regionally, and globally. That's my initial argument. So, when we look at the Indian political system, I believe that Indian strategic thought and culture are characterized by 3 dominant features. And these 3 dominant features are in hierarchical order, which disproportionately influence its grievance, its concern, as well as ambitions. The first and foremost factor is the sense of insecurity by the Indian political elite, characterized by the realization that in the last 5,000 years, there have been an entire period of less than 100 years in which the Hindu elite successfully enjoyed power and sovereignty over South Asia in a diverse ideological, ethnic, and linguistic environment, along which lines the contest has been perpetual and mostly violent and seldom peaceful. So the identity politics is the most important factor. Secondly, the dominant feature of the Indian strategic culture is the insecurity uh, rooted in the realization that the Hindu elite has not been successful in uniting and peacefully governing South Asia for less than a century in the last 5,000 years. And the second feature is equally important, interesting, and somewhat relevant to the first feature, that the non-Hindu elite, which in several episodes of history were more successful in uniting South Asia in a peaceful and prosperous power structure. First, for almost 8.5 centuries by the Muslims, and for almost 90 years by the British. So, the third feature is a consequence of the first two features, that they are deeply conscious of the fact that the non-Hindu elite was successful in peacefully ruling, exercising, legitimizing, and uniting this region under one political sovereign system, in which the Hindu majority also enjoyed the benefits of their rule, despite being the large majority, which indicates that mostly they found due opportunities under Muslim as well as British rule, despite some occasional exceptions in case of the Maratha uprising and others. So the fourth feature of the Indian strategic culture is a deep sense of hatred towards the Muslims, driven by the realization that they have been more successful in peacefully, successfully governing, ruling South Asia, despite being a minority in its entire history. And the fifth feature is another interesting aspect, that a deep distrust of the Western powers, rooted in a lingering sense of anti-imperialism, which continues to influence the thought, the discourse, and the decision-making of the Indian contemporary strategic elite. So when you combine these 5 factors, you come to identify its key features, which help us better understand their strategic character and culture. So when you look at their strategic behavior towards their minorities inside India or Indian occupied territories, or its expression towards the regional neighbors, or their way and method of engaging with the Western powers, and their continued emphasis to maintain their strategic autonomy despite being a strategic ally of the West, reflects this deep sense of distrust based on a utilitarian approach to gain access to the latest weapon systems, diplomatic recognition, diplomatic support for UN Security Council membership, diplomatic support for the export control regimes, despite not meeting their proportionate and adequate expectation to reciprocate in tangible terms in the containment of emerging powers projects, and more recently reflected in terms of an organized policy to use their intelligence agency and its assets in the target killing of political critics around the world, but more particularly in those Western countries with whom India currently formally enjoys a strategic partnership, particularly US and some of the NATO countries. So that is my initial premise. Now, coming quickly to the 4 causes of the sobering result of BJP in the recent elections. I think there are 4 factors which, in my modest view, can help explain and understand these results. First is the personality factor of Mr. Modi, that I think his charisma and popularity was overestimated by BJP as part of its political strategy. Secondly, its political narrative and discourse disproportionately and unrealistically relied on the loyalty and popularity of the Hindu extremist ideology, which leads to the third factor, which translated into a significant and deepening grievance of all minorities, particularly that of Muslims, but also of that of lower caste Hindus, Sikhs, and Christians. And that translated into a political opportunity for the other parties, and that is, supported by compelling evidence that more than 70%, according to some estimates, almost 74% Muslims voted for the Congress and allied parties. So that grievance from and the concern and hate, insecurity, which was deepening in the minorities from BJP, translated into a political opportunity for the opposing contesting parties, which were adequately and clearly exploited as part of their election campaign and strategy. The fourth factor is a disproportionate emphasis on the personality and narrative, but a neglect of the economic concerns, inability to adequately address the rising inflation, and also the unemployment in several sectors. Lastly, I think, although it can be explained better by the new Marxist paradigm, but I think there is some interesting and useful logic that while India is presenting itself as a rising economy, the process and method in which the benefits of its economic progress are shared unequally between upper caste Hindus and lower caste Hindus, as well as between Hindus and the non-Hindu minorities, also translates into a political opportunity for the opposing parties. And this dynamic is also characterized by a very interesting phenomena, that the heart and soul of the rank and file of the BJP hardcore vote bank is in the north and the west, whereas the wealth is created disproportionately in the south. So the distribution of wealth, opportunities and resources, and the unrealistic reliance on the hardcore Hindutva ideology to gain sympathy and support from the non-conservative elements of Indian voters was also a faulty political strategy, and which neglected this changing economic dynamic, which was exploited by the opposing parties. Now I come to the third aspect, that how this changing demographic reality in Lok Sabha will affect its policy process. My initial 2 comments are careful. Um, Although some analysts have been optimistic in terms of expecting too much from a larger, vocal opposition, which will, I'm sure, do its best to challenge the ideological statecraft of a weaker coalition that has emerged, led by Prime Minister Modi in his third term. I think the weight of a strong vocal opposition is a political reality which we must acknowledge. However, to what extent this weight and voice will constrain BJP, led by Modi Saab and also supported by a weak coalition, is the biggest question. In my assessment, as I have argued in my fundamental primary argument, that the Indian strategic elite's ideology and its ultimate long-term strategic goal is to build a Hindu superpower, is a bipartisan goal. However, let me qualify, its ways and methods are different by the right of center and the left of center parties. And to provide compelling evidence to support my argument, if you look at the history of South Asian security, if you look at the history of South Asian conflict, whether it is 65 war, whether it is 1971 war, whether it is the Sachin conflict, whether it is Kargil, and the almost 7-8 different crises which we have witnessed, I think it will be a grave neglect of history to overlook the reality that either Congress or BJP have not given any quarter to Pakistan in terms of its hegemonic and expansionist agenda, support for non-state actors, whether it was in case of Mukti Bahani in East Pakistan, led by, under the leadership of Indira Gandhi, and the weaponization of RAW to create instability and insurgency in neighboring countries. That was a Congress agenda. And then you come to, the more recent 26 years of BJP's emergence. Their approach has been more direct, more overt, more aggressive. That is a reality. In form, but in substance, I think the regional hegemony, regional dominance is a bipartisan Indian strategic ambition and goal. Their ways and methods are somewhat different. And in that support, I cited a few, due to paucity of time, key examples of 65 war, 71 war, and more recently. So I think too much blame has been put on BJP and for ideologically presenting a narrative and weaponizing its politics. But I think the grave harm caused to the stability, security, and prosperity of this region by Congress, I think, in my modest view, deserves equal interest, attention, and research. Now I'll come to the fourth and last part of how this current political system is likely to affect Indian strategic behavior in 4 key specific domains: information, diplomacy, economy, and military. Since my secondary argument has been that Indian ambitions, not constrained by geography, are ideological and global, and status-driven, which is a bipartisan strategic goal, although the ways and means are slightly different. But in terms of information domain, if you look at only the Disinfo Lab and the amount of money, effort which has gone into it over at least 15 years, across more than 100 countries, in the form of more than 700 platforms, reflects and offers compelling evidence at the long-term, consistent, bipartisan commitment of Indian security policy towards presenting Pakistan in particular and Muslims and Kashmiris in general in bad light as a policy objective around the world. That is a strategic objective, and the commitment and the resources that went into it are enormous and available for verification. So I do not foresee, unfortunately, a reduction, if I were to use on a lighter term, an information arms control. I doubt that, because thanks to the huge capacity, which is a reality, we must all recognize, that they have in terms of the money and the human resource which is available, particularly in the international media, academia, think tanks, and IT sectors. It is only logical to expect that it will be used, this capacity and resource will be used and has been used at the bipartisan level to harm Pakistan's image in terms of identity, credibility, acceptability, and discouraging foreign direct investment and so on and so forth. In terms of diplomacy, I definitely consider a possibility that the voice and the weight of a powerful opposition will or could reduce the more aggressive and crude and blunt method of using diplomacy to isolate Pakistan, whether it is FATF, whether it is any other multilateral forums. But Congress could be more astute, more sophisticated in the same approach as compared to BJP's rather overt, direct and crude and blunt methods of trying to achieve the same objective of diplomatically isolating Pakistan, both bilaterally and at multilateral levels. And let me, in this context, as an afterthought, recognize that the key members of Mr. Modi's security team, whether it is National Security Advisor, whether it is Minister of External Affairs, Secretary of Defense, I do not think his selection is influenced on a lighter note by the expectations from a vocal and larger opposition, which means that his approach and his reliance on the same tools and the same personalities is likely to continue, which makes it very unlikely that their approach and method are likely to undergo any drastic or significant change, particularly towards Pakistan. Now let's come to economy. I think very little has been said about this aspect, which I'll take only a couple of minutes to create another interesting and original perspective. I think if one were to read Arthashastra, it's a great and insightful document to understand not just the ways and methods, but also the ends, that the Hindu elite believes and seeks inspiration from. I think there is a concept of economic warfare that perhaps deserves adequate research and consideration in terms of understanding the Indian approach towards disincentivizing and discouraging foreign investment in Pakistan, both at bilateral and multilateral levels. Whether it is, trying to discourage countries from investing in Pakistan at bilateral level, or also in different multilateral forums as well. The Indian political diplomatic leadership leaves no stone unturned, that wherever they go, whether it is G20, whether it is SCO, whether you go at UN, you go at any forum, they leave no stone unturned to try to discourage people from trusting Pakistan in terms of economic cooperation and foreign direct investment. So I do not expect any decline in this approach. Specifically coming to the military domain, as has been witnessed by the welcome diplomatic statements that Prime Minister Modi has already received from the US leadership and several other world leaders, I do not expect a significant review or decline in the security and strategic cooperation, the access to military technology and the joint defense production, intelligence access that BJP has so far received or is likely to receive. However, let me qualify that the recent disclosure and the realization by I5 countries at the belligerent Indian attempt to use RAW to assassinate its political critics across the world, but particularly on the sovereign territories of its strategic allies, including the US, has not gone unnoticed. They have not publicly embarrassed India very strongly, but in several high-level engagements, the Americans in several track twos as well as other engagements have noted this with serious concern, and I hope in future engagements this will color their thoughts in terms of having a more realistic understanding of the Indian ambitions, capacity, and strategic behavior. More specifically, I think when you look at the three domains, if I were to, in the last part of my talk, subdivide the access and international support that India has so far received and is likely to employ as part of its regional hegemonic agenda, are subconventional, conventional, and strategic domains. I think their support for subconventional methods and outfits, both driven by distortion of Islamic ideology or exploitation of ethnic grievance, is also likely to continue, which obviously poses a lingering challenge for Pakistan's internal security and counterterrorism efforts. That is informed by the Indian realization that after 1998, a direct conventional or strategic invasion or attack is not a viable policy option. So it's a strategic shift of a more low-cost approach of bleeding Pakistan, destabilizing Pakistan, and weakening Pakistan through indirect methods by supporting subconventional warfare through ethnic and those outfits which distort Islam against Pakistani citizens and state. The conventional buildup is likely to continue, and Indian policy, as I earlier pointed out, as part of its strategic autonomy, is very careful throughout its history not to overcommit itself and not to over-depend on one single source of military technology. So, as I think Dr. Commander Azhar also knows, and I'm sure Brigadier Syed will also comment on this, that India's strategic autonomy is characterized by ensuring that it at no point in time, neither of its three services disproportionately and heavily depend on one source in order to obviate and reduce the risk of coercion, sanctions, and technology denial. Whether it's French systems, whether it's British system, whether it's American system or Russian system, they have maintained strategic autonomy and ensured that they do not want to depend on anyone. So that creates operational, training, logistical, repair, maintenance challenges, definitely. But perhaps in their strategic culture, strategic autonomy is more precious than logistical training and operational convenience. And that is a characteristic that we need to understand and recognize. In the strategic domain, there are 4 aspects in which the developments are likely to continue, but of these 4 includes nuclear, missiles, cyber, artificial intelligence, and space. The fissile material and the missile development are likely to continue at a steady pace. But I am expecting a greater commitment and resource allocation towards cyber, artificial intelligence, and space capabilities in the current regime. So, in order to conclude, I would, as I earlier pointed out, I have 4 basic arguments. Number 1, Indian strategic behavior and policy needs to be understood in the context of identity politics, which is based on the key characteristics of deep insecurity internally, deep hatred towards Muslims, distrust of the Western imperialism, and which has resulted in a lingering bipartisan desire for maintaining strategic autonomy and intervention in the neighbors, but also desiring a status that it hopes will eventually secure it as a sole Hindu superpower. And the domestic factor is that the failure of BJP's political strategy is reflected in these results. It is a weak coalition government, criticized by a vocal and larger opposition, but it is unlikely that it will review or reduce its long-term bipartisan commitment towards regional hegemony, destabilization, and support for non-state actors, and pursuit for international status and international forums. Lastly, the Indian strategic ambition and toolkit of statecraft to use information to create a bad image of Pakistan and Muslims, continue coercive diplomacy to isolate Pakistan, wage economic warfare, through also support for insurgencies and non-state actors, which sort of reinforces its strategic objective of disincentivizing foreign direct investment by creating Pakistan and Pakistani image that it is not safe for foreign investment and doing business. And lastly, its military buildup will continue, but its reliance on subconventional warfare will continue. But as compared to nuclear and conventional realms, it is likely, in conjunction with the last document related to non-contact warfare, it is more likely that it is going to invest more heavily in cyber, artificial, and space capabilities in order to harm Pakistan in those domains in which it believes it has technological, economic advantages. So with those few words, I'm again humbled and honored and grateful to IPS, particularly its leadership by very able and fatherly figure of Mr. Khalid Rahman, and to be welcomed by Ambassador Syed Muhammad Ali for sharing my modest initial thoughts on this very interesting subject at a timely discourse, and I look forward to benefiting from the valuable analysis and input from all of you in the next few minutes. Thank you so much.